Welcome back to the On Life podcast. My name is Anthony On Life. With me, as always, is Andy, a.k.a. Metafictional Meathead, and we are joined today by New Hampshire author Dan Lawton. Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And the topic of today's conversation, on top of your body of work, is going to be the realities of being a writer in 2023 and the impact of social media and big publishing on the little guy.
Yeah.
So we'll get right into it. I would love to get a little bit of background for our listeners about your career. When did you find your passion for writing, and when did you publish your first work?
Yeah, so I always wanted to be a writer. In some respect, how was to be determined. And so probably maybe when I was 11 or 12, I started writing songs and started writing poems, which is funny because I can't sing at all, but I used to sing them. I have some recordings on a little cassette tape somewhere upstairs, but luckily there's no cassette recorder or a player anywhere, so I can't listen to it. I don't want to do that. Then I got into journalism a little bit in high school and went to New England College in Henniker, New Hampshire, and was going to study journalism, but decided newspapers are dying, so
good call.
Let's not do that. Yeah.
What years were you there?
Let's see, 2007 through 2011.
Okay.
Yeah, I did some creative writing there, and I took this script writing course, which we had to concept and write the full movie script in 16 weeks, however long the semester is. And that was the first time I actually finished something of length. I was like, this is awesome. And so then that summer I started writing my first book, and it didn't make it very far. 50 pages maybe. I was like, yeah, this is terrible. And then my daughter was born. I was like, I'm home a lot, and I got nothing else to do when she's sleeping half the day. So I started writing legit. And so that was probably 2013, I think. And then a couple years later, Deception. My first book came out of that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So you've published how many books in total now? Quite a few.
Yeah, so 7. My 8th will be coming out May 25th.
So in about a week from this recording date, or a week and a half.
Yeah.
So at what point you're writing Deception? You were at home. You were enjoying it, obviously.
Definitely, yeah.
But did you have aspirations of I'm going to get this published? People are going to read this. Did you have that on your mind, or was it just, I'm enjoying doing it, so I'm going to do it?
Yeah, I have a bit of an entrepreneurial mindset, and that I wasn't just going to write, just have it sit there. So for sure, I wanted to try to do something with it. Mm-hmm. And so to get published, you have to submit query letters to agents. Basically, it's pulling together a synopsis of the book in 300 words and trying to send it out. It's like a cover letter for your book, kind of.
I've heard that step in the process can be more difficult. Convincing an agent that you're worth the while, because they only get paid if they get you a deal, and if they don't think they can get you a deal, they're not going to bother with you.
Definitely, yeah. I think that's for sure true. At this point, for me, writing the book is the easy part. Everything else is the hard part. So yeah, I pitched agents for a while. It takes months and months and months to even get responses sometimes. There was one agent that did want to see some pages, which was like, okay, maybe this could happen. And then nothing ever happened. He didn't ever respond back, which is pretty typical. They get so many letters every day that it's hard to respond to everybody. And so what I decided to do was self-publish that first book. And it really helped me learn everything, because you have to deal with the cover design, the interior formatting. You need certain specs for the width of the spine on the book. Help me with distribution and pricing, kind of figure out the whole industry. And so it was a really cool experience.
So do you think that is kind of maybe where writers should start, is just hey, I'm going to self-publish? What are the pros and cons of that process?
It could be a pro and a con, is that it's so hands-on. You're involved in every aspect of it, which to help learn it, it's kind of cool. But if you can get someone else to do it for you, I would do that. I would definitely do that.
Andy, have you ever read anything self-published?
Excuse me. I've read probably a small handful of things that were self-published.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, one of them was just like a collection of short stories.
Sure.
And yeah, actually, I know we'll talk more about social media later, but that was how I had connected with the author, was through social media.
Oh, was that Nick Voro?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. His book is Conversational Therapy. It's a collection of short stories and plays, and just talking to him, and he was kind enough to send me a copy.
That's cool.
And it was a really good book.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a little bit of a stigma about self-publishing. Did you find that to be true? That maybe, this isn't as good because it was self-published? Do people have that kind of mindset going into it?
I think at the time, for sure. Yeah, it's the stigma's gone away a little bit as the years have gone on. But yeah, getting into libraries and the bookstores, if you're self-published, is more challenging.
Right.
It's possible, and a lot of them do on consignment these days, where you can give them a handful of books and they'll shelve them, and if they don't sell them, we'll just send them back to you.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily cost them anything
Correct.
other than the shelf space.
Right. And so that's an option. There are authors now, even some really famous ones, that do self-publishing by choice.
Interesting. Can you name anybody off the top of your head?
There's guys that do hybrid. Like Stephen King does some hybrid.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think Margaret Atwood has done some hybrid before, where if you have such a built-in following,
what do they need the publisher for?
Yeah, you can make way more royalties
Sure.
self-publishing. And so if your audience is huge, you can make a killing doing it.
Yeah, I saw, this is tangential, but I saw a tweet. Somebody was going back and forth with Stephen King on Twitter, and he's a fairly politically outspoken person.
Yeah. He really is.
And I don't know if the person didn't know who Stephen King was or just didn't think highly of him, but said something about go back to watching porn in your mom's basement or something like that. And I was like, geez, what's Stephen King's net worth? And I Googled it. And, it's Google, so you have to take the results with a grain of salt. But it was $500 million. I was like, yeah, he's doing okay. If Google's guessing it's $500 million, it's definitely a lot.
Right.
So
I saw another Stephen King one recently. He was going back and forth with some guy, and he was I'm going to assume he was like a right-wing podcaster, but he was like taunting Stephen King and telling him to go and get a real job and things like that. And
great.
It's like,
I mean, some people do have a lowly opinion of writing. So.
Yeah.
So, getting back to your first book, you self-published it. What happened next?
So by the time I decided to self-publish, I had written a whole nother book.
Okay, wow.
That was Operation Salazar. And so I self-published in June of, oh boy, I don't even know what year it was anymore. And it was like, I did a lot of hand selling, went to some, like the flea markets, and had some bunch of newspaper interviews. And so I was starting to get some traction. It was kind of cool. And so I was like, I'm going to do this again. So I self-published again. And then the second time didn't go as well. So I was like, all right, let's try something different going forward. And so that's what I've done after that.
So all your books subsequently are from a publisher.
Correct.
And so how long did it take you to secure that deal?
So my third book, Amber Alert, was an interesting story in that I did the same thing, went the agent route again, and it was probably 9 or 12 months I was querying. I thought it had some potential. I got some good feedback on some of the queries. One agent said, this is publishable, but I'm just like, this is not right for me type thing.
Sure.
So I was like, all right, well, let's move forward then. And so I had locked in with this one agent who really liked it, and she sent what they call an R&R. It's revise and resubmit. And so I did that. There was like one character aspect that she didn't think worked. So I reworked the character and sent it back to her, and then waited for months and months and months. Eventually she came back and said she really likes it, but the agency that she worked with, they all had to be in agreement, and they all weren't in agreement. And so she couldn't take me on. She's like, I suspect that you'll be agented one day. So like she encouraged me to keep going. And so after that, there gets to a point where it's like, you're all set waiting on agents, want to move on. And so then I started submitting to some publishers, and it was a matter of weeks. I had a deal. It was the day before my 27th birthday is when my first contract was in my inbox.
Very cool.
Yeah.
It must have been somewhat frustrating, but also validating in a way to have an agent say, like, I think this is publishable. Like, obviously, I think everyone's a fan of their own work, more or less. I mean, you might be able to critique yourself, but generally you think you're good, or else you wouldn't pursue doing it. But it must be nice to have somebody else who kind of is in the industry say, like, yeah, I think this is good. Did you experience those feelings, or what was that like to have someone say like, yeah, you should definitely try to publish this?
Yeah, so I get an imposter syndrome a lot, where it's like I'll write something and then read it and be like, oh man, like I don't even know, like am I a fraud? Like I have no idea how do you judge if you're any good? And so like people, like some beta readers, but yeah, this is really awesome. It's like, okay, but is it? And
they might be afraid to offend, right? Even though they're supposed to
definitely
be screening it for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, when someone in the industry gives you some encouraging feedback, at least for me, it's like, all right, you're getting close.
Yeah. So despite making content about books, I'm actually much more familiar with, well, obviously the video production world, but music. I was in a band for a long time.
Yeah.
We had a small independent contract with a label.
Nice.
And it's funny because the two industries are very similar, and now a lot of people don't sign record deals.
Definitely.
It's like back in the day, almost impossible to get your music out there without a record deal.
Yeah.
Because they're going to shop it to, radio stations, and they have all the connections to get you the PR.
Yeah.
But now, like with the nature of social media and that kind of thing, I mean, there's people landing contracts with television shows for their music to be licensed, and they're making huge money doing it. And they literally recorded it in their kitchen at home on a laptop.
But someone attached it to a TikTok and it blew up.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually have heard, and correct me if this is not true, but I've heard that a lot of times publishers or even agents aren't even that concerned with the writing anymore. They want to see that you have some type of social media presence. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah. Not all of them, but a lot of them, when you submit, they'll want to know your details. How many followers do you have? How big's your email list? And it's like, why? Like, I don't know. I was talking to someone about a couple days ago. I don't even think it matters. I really don't. I know of a lot of authors. Like there's one my publisher has now. He sold over 50,000 books. He's not even on Instagram.
Right.
And so it's like,
it's interesting because it's like they want you to do the marketing, but it's like, isn't that what the publishing company is supposed to be for? So why am I paying you, kind of thing? I mean, obviously the printing and the distribution, but it's a strange thing. I read this excellent book called The Death of the Artist, and it's essentially about that, how artists can't just purely pursue their art anymore. They have to learn how to be marketers and personal branders, and it's a little insane. And but it's, to your point, I think you're right, because when I do like book reviews for the short form, like the reels and the TikToks, I love to tag people if I can, because it draws more eyeballs. But a lot of times I'm like, this author doesn't even exist on Instagram.
yeah,
Right.
for sure.
So. I know, like one of my favorite books that I read last year in 2022, I follow the author on Instagram, but he barely has 150 followers.
Yeah.
And I think it would be such a shame, like and he was published by a pretty small independent press. And it would be such a shame, like if I hadn't gotten a chance to read that book because he has no real social media following, and as far as I know, doesn't have an email list or things like that. I think it is pretty short-sighted to just brush an author aside because they don't have a social media presence.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just sham anyway. Like Twitter's a good example. I have maybe like 9,000 Twitter followers. Probably 8,500 are other writers. And so it's like nobody cares.
Yeah.
Like, you'll tweet and have like 40 impressions. It's like, what's the point? So I don't.
You have other people that know the grind and want to support you, but it's not necessarily, I don't say not fans, but
that's accurate though.
Yeah.
It's just other writers supporting writers.
Right.
Basically.
Which is great. It's great to see that, but it's not effectual to your bottom line, I don't think.
Correct.
There was a similar conundrum in the photography world, particularly last year when Instagram came out and said, we're a video platform, we're not a photo platform anymore. And historically on social media, Instagram was like kind of the place for photographers to share their work.
Yeah.
And so everywhere you went, every photography related forum, people were saying, let's all get together and make a new social media really for photographers. I'm like, here's the problem with that. there's nobody going to be on this platform other than photographers.
Yeah.
Like the reason why you want to be on Instagram is because non-photographers are going to see your work.
That's right.
Theoretically.
Yeah.
And obviously photography is a much easier medium for people to quickly digest as opposed to writing, obviously. But I thought that was interesting. So how long does it take you to write a book?
So early on, it didn't take long at all. I think Operation Salazar was like 4 months.
Wow.
Now we're looking like a year. I had one book, The Greenhouse, about 2 years. It was the first time I get stuck on something, like legit stuck. Like I'd written maybe half of it and was like, something's missing, something's not right. And so it just kind of sat there just in my mind. The back of my mind is kind of resting there. And then like the rest of it came one night. I was putting my daughter to bed. She was very small at the time. I was like rocking in the rocking chair and it was like, oh, like there's the idea. And so then I went in the other room and wrote the idea down and then was able to finish it off from there. But a full year these days, most of the time.
That's interesting that you say that. I think that I've heard other stories of similar things, like writers just have something that clicks.
Yeah.
I think maybe most famously is Garcia Marquez, when 100 Years of Solitude, they were like driving to go on vacation. And all of a sudden he was like, you guys go. I'm going home.
Oh, really?
Like, I've
never heard that.
And so he turned around and wrote this book. So with the... Well, tell our listeners a little bit about the genres that you write in.
Yeah, so primarily I write suspense and thrillers. All of my stories have some sort of mystery in them. The Greenhouse is a bit of an exception in that it's more of a literary pacing story. It's about mental health, but there is a big twist at the end because I want to stay in that genre. I like to read thrillers and suspense, and so there's got to be some action, some excitement, some plot twists, and so that's my lane.
And is that something you've always been interested in? And so when you started writing, you knew that was going to be your genre?
Yeah, so even like the shows that I watch or the movies that I watch, most of the time it's those. I mean, there are exceptions, but like I've had ideas like for romance novels, but I'm not sure I could get through one, honestly. so I don't think it's ever going to happen, but yeah, those are the stories that keep me interested in reading and in watching stuff, and so I think that's where I'll stay.
So who are some of your favorite authors?
Yeah, there's a few that stand out. One is John Hart. He won like back-to-back Edgar Awards, I think it was, but like he's not like a household name despite having all these accolades. But he was like the first book that I picked up just out of leisure. I just was in Barnes & Noble one day just looking for a book, and that was the first one. I was like, oh yeah, this is awesome. So I read all his books. I love Harlan Coben's work as well. Some of the plots can be iffy, but that's just like a personal preference thing. But the way he writes, it's a lot of action, fast paced, but like not too fast where like it's, get to know the characters at all. Those are the two favorites, like Wendy Walker, TJ Newman, I think her first name is TJ. I'm sure Drowning, and she has a new book coming out, which her story is really cool. She was a flight attendant, like an aspiring writer, and nothing ever happened, and then something happened. She signed this big deal for over $1 million, and her life has changed like overnight.
Nice.
And so those are inspirational stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we were discussing doing this podcast, this all kind of came together at the last moment. So Andy and I decided to do a podcast last weekend, had great reception. I was like, okay, well, I guess this is a thing that we're doing.
We have to keep doing this.
Podcasters now.
And I was like, well, I'm supposed to go shoot a little video about this guy, Dan. He's a local author. And I said, why don't we just do a podcast? I think it'll be great. And Andy goes, oh, yeah. He goes, a guy whose books I've never read in a genre I don't typically read. He's like, what could go wrong?
Yeah. So,
but I don't read a ton of mystery or thriller, but I do have a good appreciation for that genre. I think maybe a little cliche, or people who are into the genre will laugh at me, but I really enjoyed the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series, which I would consider kind of mystery who done it, especially the first one.
Yep.
But there are some great writers in that genre. But I do think it's similar to romance, where there is like a somewhat of a perception about it. Have you found that you've been able to kind of bring people over to the dark side into your writing with some of your books, like friends, family, or just acquaintances that they've given that genre a try because you wrote it?
Some people. My wife is a case where I have not. She reads like fantasy books, and historical fiction. This is not in her lane at all.
Sure.
She liked The Greenhouse. Another book she didn't like, and then I'll talk to her about plot and stuff, but it's not her thing, so she doesn't read it, it's funny, but it doesn't really bother me. But yeah, there's been other people that for sure have maybe isn't their thing that they'll read it. Like, it's kind of cool, right? You know this person. It's like, see what it is, whether you like it or not. It really doesn't bother me. Like, people, either you like it or you don't.
Sure.
Nothing personal.
It's like music or whatever.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Have you read much mystery or thrillers, Andy?
No. I'm trying to think of anything, and I don't think I have.
Andy is our resident avant-garde book snob.
Pretentious lit bro.
Nice.
So
Do you find it difficult to balance writing and reading?
Only when I'm like heavy into the writing. If I'm in like the last half of a book, most of my time I'll be writing. Depends on the time of the year too. But for the most part, if I can block out, even if it's a half hour a day to read, that's usually okay. The more I read, the better I am as a writer, I think, and that you absorb a lot of information, a lot of ways to do it. And so I think it's really important to getting better.
Yeah,
definitely.
Despite having no aspirations of being a writer, I follow R writing on Reddit, and that's common advice I see is just read more if you're feeling stuck or whatever. True creativity exists only in a vacuum, right? So you can get some inspiration from what you're reading.
Sure.
And how often? This is something I always wanted to ask an author. How often do you like reread what you've already written during the writing process?
Pretty frequently, and so it depends how long between writing sessions. So like if I wrote the day before, I probably won't read what I wrote, but if it's been a couple of weeks, I might read the whole thing up till that point. I know there's Harlan Coben. I've heard him say he reads the entire thing every time. So
that's insane.
He'll sit down to write chapter 40, and he'll read the first 39 chapters before he writes chapter 40.
It must take so long.
Yeah,
it must.
That's time consuming.
I mean, I guess if that's your full-time job, maybe you can do that, but it's not my full-time job, so I don't have time to do that.
When you're working on a new book, what's your process like? Like, do you have, do you block out like an hour a day? Do you have a page count or a word count goal for the day, or do you just kind of strike while the iron's hot? And if you hit 6 pages and you feel like you have 10 more, you keep going, or you stop at the 6, or was your process like?
Yeah, my benchmarks are chapters, and so for me, it depends, but a chapter is roughly like 1,000 to 1,500 words for me. But it depends on the chapter, right? I mean, I've had some that are 75 words and some that are 2,500 words. It really depends on what the scene is. But I don't like stopping in the middle of a chapter. Like, same as reading too. Like, I find it awkward, and so if I'm going to sit down to write, or in my case, usually stand up to write, it's got to be a chapter at a time, if I'm able to.
Yeah.
So, when you are formulating the idea for a new book, what is I really want to dig into, like, what's your motivation? What do you want to, like, wow somebody with a story, or is it like, I just have this idea and I just need to get it out of me? Kind of what is like the catalyst for you writing these stories?
Yeah, so I think when I read in the genre, I think a lot of genres are this way. They're formulaic. And so, like, with thrillers and suspense, the last couple of chapters is going to be like the big explosive reveal, who did what was their motivation. While there's some of that in the stuff that I write, I try to do something a little bit different. And so it is telling a story for sure. I have some books that have like some really big twists. Others maybe aren't as big, but I just want to write something that I'd want to read, which I think for any writer is important. If you try to like, if I were to try to write romance because it sells well, like I just don't, I don't think I can get through it, and so that's why I haven't.
Do you tend to write, when you're working on something, do you tend to write pretty linearly? So like you start with chapter 1, you go chapter 2 as from start to finish, or do you maybe have an idea of how you want the book to end and kind of not necessarily write those final 3 chapters where there's the big twist or the big reveals or what have you, but kind of outline what that's going to look like and start kind of backwards from there? Or
that's a great question.
Do you, as you're writing, kind of get an idea of, okay, this is what I've developed. This is how I want things to be revealed. This is what I want the twist to be. How does that go about for you?
Yeah, so there's 2 schools of thoughts when you're writing. One is you're an extensive outliner. The other is they call them a seat of the pantser. I'm more of that one. And so if I see like a rough idea of how it's going to end, for me, so many things change when I'm writing that if I were to spend the time outlining the whole book, it would really be a waste of my time. I'm not sure I could even do it anyway. Like the middle, it's hard to know what's going to happen.
Right.
Which it sounds kind of weird, right? It's like you have control over it. Yeah, like things just kind of happen. Even when I'm writing something, you can just start typing something and it goes off in a different direction.
Yeah.
And so, so I do write linear. A lot of times I have multiple point of views. There's probably been times when I've stayed in one point of view and like skipped over someone's and went back and kind of filled in the gaps.
Gotcha.
But for the most part, yeah, I'm able to switch back and forth between characters and definitely write linear.
So I think it's interesting. Very early on in the conversation, you had mentioned that you had written a screenplay for a semester, and then you got into writing your first book, and you were like, I'm good. Like this is too hard. Do you find it difficult not having a firm deadline to stick to? Like, I gotta just commit to writing this piece, because I think that's one thing people underestimate, right? Like in college, it was, I don't want to say easy, but it was easier because you had that, I have to get it done for my class. But as a independent writer, there's no one holding you accountable for it necessarily. So
well, that's definitely true. Yeah, so I just finished a series, and so the first 2 books came out, and so in my mind, like the publisher didn't give me a deadline, but in my mind, I wanted like roughly within a year of each other. And so that kept me going. The one I'm working on now, though, I probably started in maybe October and only like 40 pages in. And so, yeah, being independent, that is the luxury of it. I can do really whatever I want. But then there's something inside me too that wants to push me so it's not too long, right? You want to like stay relevant type thing.
yeah.
And so, although now that I've said that out loud, I really got to start writing again.
You guys got to get out. I got work to do.
But that is so nice recently that it's like, I got to go outside and like cut the grass or do something different than stare at the screen. So,
well, especially as you mentioned before we hit record, that you also write professionally as a day job. So you're writing a lot.
it's true.
What is kind of the ultimate goal for Dan Lawton's writing career as a fiction writer?
Yeah, so I've been with the same publisher for the last 4 books. They've been good, and I've had good results, but I want to take the next step. And so I did have an agent for a while with my 4th book with Plum Springs. It didn't end up working out. I ended up getting a deal outside of his efforts. It was cool, though. Like I was on the desk of some of the biggest editors in New York on submission. No one acquired it, which it does happen. So the next step, once I finish this book that I have to write, I want to get another agent, and then I want to go bigger. I want to get a bigger publishing house, hopefully someone who has some marketing dollars they can put behind it, and till one day be on the New York Times bestsellers list would be hitting the dream.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
very cool.
Do you find that those kind of traditional benchmark goals affect the way that you write? Do you find yourself trying to write in a way that might be a little bit more appealing to a broader audience?
I think so. Yeah, I think every writer's different. I like my books to have commercial appeal. I think the one that I'm working on now might, but it's hard to know, right? Yeah, there is a certain way that you write, like in the genre. If you start with action, you have to start like when I say action, it's not necessarily like explosions, but a lot of times it's like mental trauma for me, conflicts, that type thing. So we got to start early with a conflict, and so you kind of know what's going to be coming. And so chapter 1, the last few books, the conflict has been right there for you to know what it is, which I think helps with the commercial appeal of it.
To be honest, the same thing applies to when I make content for social media.
Yeah.
You start with a strong hook, get people engaged right away. When I'm teaching other businesses how to do their social media content, I'm like, say something controversial right from the start. And we're not talking like politically divisive, but
Right.
maybe just something that challenges a commonly held belief about a certain topic or whatever. Got to rope people in. We have short attention spans.
For sure.
So let's talk about that a little bit more in depth with the social media piece and the big publishing. Obviously, Amazon's kind of dominating the world. Social media makes it easier for you to reach people. In general, where the whole industry is, would you say it's a net positive or a net negative?
In terms of social media? Or?
Just like the whole state of publishing, its role, the way social media ties into it. Do you think it's better to be a writer now in 2023 generally than it was 20 years ago or 40 years ago?
I mean, it's so different. There's more opportunity now, and that there's so many avenues, which is good and bad. It's bad in that anyone can be published now because you can just do it yourself.
Right.
Which can the marketplace, it can kind of like overload it. In the past, John Grisham, this guy, like I listen to his interviews a lot. Something about his voice just like soothes me. Plus, I like his books. He talks about what it was like back like in the late 80s and the early 90s. It was so much different, and that like he was agent, publisher, like that's it. That's the only way to go.
Right.
And so like it's easier now to do it, but I think it's harder to get traction.
If you read about like stories about Hemingway or F. Scott Fitzgerald, those guys were like rock stars back in the day.
Yeah.
They were like big celebrities. And now,
Definitely.
I mean, I think even if you liked an author, you might not be able to pick him out of a crowd walking down the street. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Our media habits as a society have changed so much, but yeah.
I joke with my daughter about that all the time. Like when I was like, yeah, I'm a celebrity. She's like, Dad, no, you're not. She's like, authors aren't celebrities. I'm like, that's actually true, yeah.
They're just normal people.
That's right.
So what are some of your guilty pleasures for reading? Do you have anything that would surprise us?
I'm not sure that I would. I stay in the genre for the most part.
Yeah.
Trying to think if there's anything strange that I like some dark stuff sometimes. There's this book, I'm not sure I can think of the name of it right now. It was by like a Spanish author. It was a translated version into English. It was a few years ago now, but it was about, there was this girl who was being held captive by her family, like in the basement. And it was just like her in the basement the whole time. And it was real dark and real creepy.
That sounds very dark.
But it was awesome. I loved it. I think, yeah, since I can't remember the title, it's not a spoiler. She ends up getting out. I can't remember what happens when she gets out, but I can go to a dark place sometimes.
Yeah.
by
Nice.
choice. Yeah.
What would you say? Because, early Tony and I mentioned this isn't really a genre that we read. Last week when he and I sat down, we were talking about, more challenging reads and things like that. And we were talking about, or discussing good entry points for people that want to start reading more challenging literature. What would you suggest if someone wanted to get into more mystery or suspense, thriller,
That's easy.
like the genre?
I would say Dan Lawton.
Aside from Dan Lawton.
Great
And what are some authors or books that you would recommend for someone wanting to read more mystery or thriller books?
Fair question.
Harlan Coben's a good one. He's like a really good example of what the genre is. Someone I would avoid personally is James Patterson. He's like the best-selling author of all time, one of them. But I think the books are trash, honestly.
I love it. That's going to be. I'm going to cut that into the
Lead
opening
with
of
that.
this
That's the
episode.
lead.
That's
Yeah.
our.
That's
our
going to be the
controversy.
title.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the lead.
Don't read James Patterson.
No, James Patterson is trash. That's going to be the title. And is it just the writing, or do you find it's too formulaic? What about it do you dislike?
Yeah, it's both. Yeah, the writing isn't good. The chapters are like 3/4 of a page, and so there's something about being too fast, where it's like you're bouncing so much that it's hard to even grasp what's going on. I mean, he has this strategy now where he has writers that like work for him, and so he's working on like 40 or 60 books at a time.
That's insane.
Yeah, they just outline. I saw some interview on one of the TV shows. Like he showed his writing room. There's just like stacks of manuscripts, and he just like they outline briefly, and then he has writers take them and run with them. Then he asks like yeah or yay or nay type thing. But it's like, dude, like you don't even do it. Like,
I say, at what point does that become not a James Patterson book anymore? Like,
I don't know how we can put his name on it.
It's his team of
yeah. So yeah, I mean,
you could change it to edited by James Patterson, but he probably has someone that does that too.
yeah, I mean, good for him for making the money. Like,
Yeah.
do it, but
Sure,
I don't
but
know,
there's
man.
got to be. I'm so conflicted about that. Like, get the bag, I get it, but
Right.
but at the same time, like, dude, you're already extremely wealthy, so why not bring the integrity back into it? Maybe I don't know.
Right.
Hot take there, I know, but that leads me to my next question. Let's reverse back in time. Let's say that you self-publish, okay, decent results, but you never make it to working with an actual publisher. Does Dan Lawton keep writing? You know, do you think you'd still write every day or every week?
I think there's a chance. You know, when I'm not writing, there's always like something in the back of my mind. Might be guilt that is like, you should be writing right now. And so there are certain times of the year when I call it the itch. I'll get the writing itch. It's like it's time to start working on something. I suspect that would still be there. I don't know if I'd write as much or would have published as many books. It was just self-publishing. But I do think I would still be writing at least a little bit.
See, that's how you know this guy's a writer.
Right.
James Patterson's out there. He's like, whatever. Slap my name on it. It's all
Exactly,
good.
yeah.
That's right.
Oh, God. I mean, yeah, that's a little too far.
Yeah.
A bridge too far for me, I think.
Yeah.
So let's talk about artificial intelligence. And are you familiar with ChatGPT?
You know, I've heard about it so much. I've been like avoiding the conversations, reading about it, because I just think the whole thing is like not going to use it, not interested.
That's kind of where I am. Like, I have a cursory knowledge of what the whole deal with it is.
Yeah.
But I've never logged on to do anything with it. I don't really read anything about it.
Yep.
For a primer for you guys and those listening.
Us Luddites.
Our three dedicated fans, I'm sure we already have. ChatGPT is essentially a chat bot. So you can literally have a conversation with it.
Yeah.
So it's not just like, let me ask you something and you spit something back out at me. You can literally kind of have a back and forth if you want to. Mm-hmm. But most people are using it for copywriting or some people use it to even like, I don't know how to respond to this email. So, hey, ChatGPT, how would you respond to this email where I need to like basically tell someone to F off in a polite way or type of thing, you know? I had it. I've been stalling on filming the visuals for this, but I've recorded the audio portion of a video about. I ask it to emulate 3 very well-known authors and to see how well it does. And spoiler alert, it's not great, you know.
Yeah, right.
It'll probably get better over time, but I have found a couple uses for it. I did a video about it giving book recommendations and actually did a decent job with that. One of its big failings was I said, recommend me other works for people who are fans of Thomas Pynchon, and just like listed out a bunch of Thomas Pynchon novels. It's like, well, yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, so you're very anti-AI then. So you wouldn't even entertain using it as like an editor necessarily.
I don't think I would. No, to me, books should be hands-on. And so, like, there's copy editors, there's proofreaders that want the work, that are good at doing the work. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe I'll have to convert as time goes on, but I don't know. I think the whole process is and should be manual.
I think for me, like, whether it's any part of the process, the writing process, if someone spits a prompt into Chat GPT, write me a novel about this, or edit my novel about this. I think for me that would take away a lot of the human element of
Definitely.
of what the book is going on in the book. I think some time ago, I read mostly fiction, and I had read a quote. It was something, it was like, fiction is about what it's like to be a human. And whether that's, your books in a mystery thriller genre, or something more avant-garde or literary, or romance, or whatever genre you want, like, there's some element of that book that has to do with what it's like to be a human being. And I think for me, having some sort of artificial intelligence involved in that process takes away a lot of that.
Well, I think that's the.
Totally.
I think people are afraid to acknowledge that a computer could potentially distill what it is to be a human,
Right.
down to.
And I had this
tangible.
I had this thought. A few minutes ago when you said, like, people are using the AI software to get an idea of how to respond to an email that they don't know how to respond to. And it's certainly a good idea to get feedback if you're not sure how to respond to an email, especially if you need to tell someone to F off, but you need to be tactful and professional. But
Just put best regards at the end.
right.
I think that's how they say God bless.
Yeah. Bless your heart.
Yeah, bless your
But
heart, right.
at a certain point, if you in my opinion, if you go to an AI service to respond to that email, you're going to do it for another email, and you're going to do it for another email. You're going to do it for text message. You're going to do it for whatever method of communication. And then at some point, you just stop being able to communicate. And
Yeah, for sure.
That's a legitimate concern. I know that I don't know if this is true or not, but I've seen news headlines about some schools just already nixing their writing courses because, like, high school kids they're obviously quick to take up new technologies,
Right.
So they're already using ChatGPT, and the teachers are like, "Well, what's the point? Let's just teach them something else."
I've seen that,
which
with-
is like heartbreaking to me as
it's-
a reader and someone that does enjoy writing, for fun.
I've seen that in college courses where there's, like, the race of AI essay writing and other services trying to keep up with that, to, like, before you'd have your service where, if some kid went into Wikipedia and just copy and pasted the whole Wikipedia article, you can check for plagiarism. And now the professors and the teachers or whatever have to figure out if it was plagiarized, but if it was
AI
written
wrote
by
it.
a computer.
Yeah.
And
There is some software that can tell you if it's AI generated or not. And that's kind of like the funny thing about it is, like, the technology's progressing so rapidly that they're using the technology to catch the technology.
this is
It's a
how
little
we get
weird.
Skynet.
This is how you get Skynet, right.
It's going to be a battle between these two.
Dan's next novel is going to be a sci-fi. So let me ask both of you guys this question. Let's say someone that you trust, someone whose opinion you trust, comes along and says, "You guys got to read this book. It's amazing." You read it, it blows your mind, and then after the fact, you found out that AI wrote it. How do you feel about that? Would you be pissed? Would you? I mean, I know it's a theoretical, so it's hard to answer, but
I think that would bother me a lot. I feel like it would. I mean, yeah, it's just like it's a program writing it for you, and it's like, I don't know, it takes everything out of it. I hope you'd be able to tell, right? Like, if we go back to the human element, right? If we're talking about emotions, like, can the robot even understand what an emotion is?
Yeah.
And so hopefully you'd be able to tell, but I don't know. It's possible that could happen.
Andy, how would you feel if you found out this book that you read and loved was
I feel.
fake?
I think I'd probably feel the same way. I'd feel like duped.
Yeah.
Like I like kind of a sucker. Like I was had. I hope I would be able to tell. It's, however, a much more likely scenario that someone would tell me I have to read this book and it's great, and I would buy it, and it would sit on my shelf for 3 years before I actually got to it. So
naturally,
of course.
But I don't think I would be happy about that if I found out that, like, oh man, a computer wrote this.
I mean, I use ChatGPT almost every day for various things. Sometimes, for example, I made a video the other day about how to get out of a reading slump, and I had come up with 5 or 6 bullet points, and I was like, I wonder if I'm missing anything. And I asked ChatGPT, and it was scary because it came up with like the exact same like points I had thought of, and I was like, ooh, that's a little creepy. You know what I mean? Like, that's a little strange.
Maybe it's listening, right? When you're talking about something, and then Google will give you an ad,
Right,
and so maybe that's built into the software.
I think there's part of me.
It could be. It could be. I don't know.
I think I definitely would prefer a book written by an actual human being, but I think there's a part of me that
Very natural thing.
Yeah. There's a part of me that's, the fan of experimental fiction in me would kind of like to see how that would compare. I think I would be interested to see if it's something I'd be a fan of. I do think, like Tony just asked, if I read something and loved it and then found out after the fact that it was written by AI, I feel like that would be a weird perspective. But I do think I would be interested in reading something that was written by a computer and see how that stacks up to some of my favorite novels.
At this point, where the technology is at right now, available to the public, I can tell you without a doubt, it's not up to par for that.
Right.
I think they gave ChatGPT like a medical board exam, and it got like 99.9% correct. It was like unbelievable. But that makes sense, right? Because that's a little bit more A and B.
Yeah.
Where writing, like you said, Dan, the human emotion of it, it's hard for a machine to replicate. It can fake it, but you can tell most of the time that it's faked.
It is not a sentient being.
It's not a sentient being. And I have this argument with some of my friends that are really into like the Marvel movies, for example.
Yep.
I have a hard time getting into it because I know that a large majority of what you're seeing is CGI. And even if it looks cooler and maybe even looks real enough, I know that this was not done on set and camera.
Yeah.
And that takes something away from it for me personally. And obviously, those movies are extremely popular. So for most people, that's not an issue. But I kind of feel the same way about the visuals, but also the writing.
All right, so Dan hates James Patterson. You hate Marvel movies. Somewhere in the next 20 minutes, I have to come up with some hot take.
I'm sure that should not be a problem for you.
We can just burn down the internet.
I mean, for you, that's probably the easiest. I probably read a more diverse types of books than you do. So Andy's definitely, I wouldn't call you a genre reader, but you're a little more narrowly focused, I would say, than me.
I think so. We were talking about this last week. I definitely tend to gravitate towards more obscure, difficult, demanding stuff.
Yep.
We're both actively reading Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon, which is one of my favorite books. And I've talked about it's one of the hardest books I've read.
It's a difficult book,
yeah,
for sure.
I like books that are a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
And so I think within that kind of lane, I'd like to think at least I kind of have a wider net within that niche, but I am probably not a very diverse reader. I do have, particular tastes, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
same.
It's there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing. I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all. I think that. Well, let me ask you this, Dan. So when you're writing, do you think about the complexity of it sometimes? Like, do you ever pull back and say this might be a little bit too hard for my audience to follow, or are you really cognizant of like the vocabulary that you're using? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so for the most part, there were 2 books in the middle, Plum Springs and The Greenhouse, that intentionally I wanted to make it a little bit more of a literary writing style with the language a little bit more difficult. I just wanted to do it. And so the most recent books and the ones before that, the language is a lot simpler in the genre, which can be frustrating sometimes, is that it almost feels like it has to be dumbed down sometimes.
Like you want to write an entertaining story, but you also want to write like a good piece of writing.
Right. Yeah, and so like some of the books that do the best, it's just like a very, very simple language, and it's just like an exciting plot, which I like the plot aspect, but sometimes it's like we can spin this a little bit better, which is what I try to do.
Did you find writing those more, like you said, literary driven books, did you find that more fulfilling or more fun to do?
Yeah, I did. Those are probably my two favorite ones that I've written. Although Plum Springs, I personally think it's my best one.
That was one of my questions.
It's been by far my worst selling one.
That's the one that Andy's going to start with. He's going to take a copy with him home. And he's like, no one's heard of it? Perfect. Send it over.
I think it's my favorite one. I think it has the best balance of good writing with good storytelling. I think the cover design might be the best, but it's been awful in the market for whatever reason.
Does that affect you in a mental health way? Because I know you mentioned that as a kind of a topic in one of your works. Is it tough to like put something out there that you're just like, this is so good, I love that I accomplished this, and then the feedback is just like, yeah, like you said, it's not your best selling work. How do you cope with that?
Sometimes it's a little tough. It's like, man, like, is it even worth my time? But most of the time, I've already moved on to something different, to another story, which I'm excited about. And so I try to publish and just move on.
Yeah.
Usually I'm in the middle of something when the book comes out, so I got to even like kind of forget what the book's about. Like, not like completely, but like some of the character names is a possibility. Like, I'm not sure I could tell you the names of the characters in some of the older books right now.
I mean, I think that's not uncommon when writers have a prolific history.
Yep.
Totally blanking on my next question. Andy?
I actually kind of want to pull back from the writing for a second. You just said something about Plum Springs. You think it has the best cover out of all your work. This is something I'm always a little bit curious about. What goes into the cover design? How involved in that process are you? Do you have any say? Do you have the final say? How does that work?
Yeah, it depends on the publisher. The level I'm at right now, it's working with independent presses, and so they don't have as many restrictions as some of the bigger ones do. So I am allowed input. I don't design them by any means, but with the current publisher, how the process works, I send them any ideas that I have, and then they'll send you a mock-up, and you can provide feedback. Usually I like them. It's like, yeah, this is great. Cool. I'm not, art-wise, I'm not like too particular about it. And so I just kind of let the designer do their thing for the most part, unless it's something like that's an error was made or something. But yeah, I'm pretty easy about it. I try to think about it visually like it was on Amazon, right? It's just like the little square, something that pops off the page a little bit. But it's not really my lane. So
yeah, the thumbnail. You have to have the right thumbnail.
You know,
that's right.
Obviously, the old saying, you shouldn't judge a book by a cover, which I think is accurate. But there have definitely been plenty of times where, like, I'll see a book, I'm like, this is a really cool cover. I want to get this book, and sometimes that's all it takes.
It grabs your attention anyway.
Yeah,
right? It's like you can tell a lot of times what genre it's going to be by the cover, and so like if you don't want to read something that's historical and you could see some historical clothing or something, it's like, well, I'm probably not going to be interested in that type of thing. So I don't know if it's so much judging as just like filtering.
Yeah,
I think that there's no reason why a cover can't play a role in your experience of the book.
Yeah.
I think that if a cover gets you excited to read a book, you're already going to that first page with a little bit of a preconceived notion, which can make you experience the book in a different way. So I think it's relevant.
I think, obviously the writing and what's between the covers is the biggest piece, but I do think to some extent the cover is part of the art. It's part of what makes the book the book.
Yeah,
it's part of
the whole experience.
Yeah, exactly.
No question. Yeah.
So I'd like to start to wrap this up, but Is there where would you recommend somebody start with your works if someone wanted to check out what you're doing? Do you have a particular book you think they should start with?
I think generally speaking, the newer the book, the better the work. If you're into series, I just wrote a series, and so these three here, that was before, is the first one of the series. That's a good place to start. If you like standalone, something a little bit slower paced, The Greenhouse has been pretty successful. It won the 2021 maybe New Hampshire Writers Project Literary Award for fiction, plus some other awards. He was a finalist for the most thought-provoking book and a different award category.
Very cool.
And so that one's been pretty successful. It's funny because the reviews are up and down. People either like it or they don't.
I think that's good though.
I do too.
I think something that's polarizing. You know, if somebody it reads it and they feel nothing, then you failed. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
for sure.
For someone to be like, "Fuck this book," like that's good. You created an emotional reaction. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been some people who I got some emails about it, like, this is really good. Like, I really appreciate this. I've seen some other reviews that, there was one, it was a 1-star review, which is, a little harsh. But they just, it was a personal attack, right? If you like this book, you don't have any intelligence. This book is just horrendous. I stopped reading reviews after I read that because it just pissed me right off.
Sure,
so.
yeah.
I have to say, I can't speak for Tony, but I hate leaving bad reviews.
Yeah. That
And
bother me.
well, the thing, I think, I don't know if you track anything on Goodreads or if you
definitely
that's kind of my primary app where I track reading and things like that.
Same.
And I do think the 5-star system there can be a little bit arbitrary, but I don't think it's very rare I give anything less than 3 stars. I'm pretty quick to, if I'm not liking a book, to just say this isn't for me. I'm not gonna spend the time and the effort finishing it.
People have a hard time differentiating between I didn't like it because it wasn't for me, and I didn't like it because it's not good.
Right.
And there is a difference.
There's definitely a difference, but whatever the reason behind it, if I don't like a book, if it's something that would, in theory, I would rate 1 or 2 stars.
Yeah.
I probably am just not going to finish that book, and I'm not going to leave that rating because I didn't finish it. I didn't like it, whether it was a bad book or it just wasn't for me. I don't think that really matters. I didn't like the book. I'm not going to leave a negative review because I didn't complete it. I also think, at the end of the day, I think it's great that you took the time to write the book. You
put the effort in.
You put the effort into it, no matter what degree of writing it is, whether it's I don't want to say dumbed down, but something that's less complex or a very dense literary work. You put the time and effort into writing a book.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Who am I? I'm just a guy that is apparently on a podcast now and have an Instagram page. Who am I to be no, this book sucked. Don't waste your time reading it. What have I done to merit tearing down your book? I would rather spend that time and effort talking about books that I liked and that I loved and that I think more people should read.
That's fair. Yeah, I don't know why I have a hard time quitting a book, even if I don't like it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Although I've done it a couple times recently, but it's been I have to force myself to do it.
I'm a big fan of DNFing.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
I will.
It stresses me out that I'm not reading something good, and the next book could be the best book I've ever read. I want to get to that sooner. I think a lot of people feel the way you do, though.
Yeah, I've been struggling with it, but it's when it's a chore to read, it's this probably isn't working out. And so I was halfway through one last week and was I'm just uninspired by this. I just gotta move on.
Especially when you're writing and you're reading, you're trying to balance both of those things.
Yeah.
So the newer your work, you said, is maybe a better place for people to start. I think that makes total sense. Obviously, you've progressed as an author. Where's the best place for people to buy your books?
Really anywhere online. Local bookstores, some have them, some don't. Some libraries have them, some don't. Most of my effort right now is focused online. And
Can they
so
order them directly from your website?
You can do that as well. Yep. DanLawtonFiction.com or Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart. I keep getting my own ad on Walmart. They're like, you should buy this book. I'm like, I wrote this book.
Well, actually,
Oh man, he's bumping up his own sales. Andy, did you have any other questions before we wrap up?
I have one question.
Yeah.
Give me 3 to 5, what would you say are your desert island books?
Ooh, great question.
What's so funny is that there's only been one book that I've read more than once. Every other book I've read just one time. And so there's not a lot of people have like a go-to, right? It's like I read this book every year. It's my favorite. I'm not really sure I have a favorite book, which is like so bizarre. So I just need 3 to 5 books I haven't read.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
Controversial answer.
That
might be more controversial than James Patterson is trash.
I was going to say, I think I'm not a prolific rereader. I definitely have a handful of books that I have reread. I don't have any that I'm like, on an annual cycle with where like I have to read this every year or every 2 years or what have you. But I don't think I could do that. I don't think I could just pick 3 to 5 that I haven't read and those
Hope
are
for
my
the best.
those. Yeah.
For the
No,
best.
I would pick 3 to 5 that I know I like, that I know I will continue to get things out of with each successive read.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, but you
and
could
land there.
you could pick 3 from authors that you know you like.
That's fair. I could do that.
That you haven't read.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe the problem on my end is that in the genre that I read with a lot of plot twists, like once you know the plot twist, it's like you're probably not going to be surprised second time through.
That makes a lot of
fair.
sense.
Yeah.
Unless you haven't read it in a while, which is why like the one book that I did read twice, it was probably like 10 years in between. So I didn't really remember hardly any of it.
Yeah.
And so that helped. So I could do that. Go back to some books on my shelf that I haven't read in a while that I know I liked and do that.
Yeah,
that could be an option.
I'm planning to do that with a book that I loved when I was younger, but I don't remember much of it other than the loose plot. So we'll be rereading it and seeing what it's like as an adult. So, well, hey, Dan, this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much
appreciate it.
for
Thank you
coming
for
along.
having us, welcoming us into your home.
Yeah, everyone go to danlawtonfiction.com. We'll put the links in the description or show notes or wherever you are enjoying this podcast. That might be too assumptive on my part, and we'll see everyone next time for our next discussion. See you later.